In Module 11, we'll be covering the subfield of Industrial Organizational, or I/O Psychology. I/O Psychology is focused on applying psychological principles and research to improve the overall work environment. I/O psychologists might be interested in questions like, what types of leadership styles result in better performance of employees, or who are the best applicants to hire for a job? In this first video, I'll discuss 3 related topics in I/O psychology: job performance, employee selection, and employees' job satisfaction. In the last video, I'll do a deeper dive looking at different leadership styles. Most likely, since the beginning of human industry, employers have been interested in how to get the best performance out of their employees. For example, a famous historical study was conducted in the 1920s by the Hawthorne Works electric plant in Illinois. The company wanted to know how different lighting conditions affected worker productivity, so they hired researchers to conduct a study investigating this. However, the study was poorly designed, and later researchers discovered that increases in worker productivity had nothing to do with the change in lighting at all. Rather, the workers simply worked harder when they knew they were being observed. The findings from this study, that is, that people's behavior can change simply as a result of being observed, have since come to be referred to as the Hawthorne effect. It's something that researchers today from any discipline need to be aware of when designing experiments looking at human behavior. Organizational research has advanced quite a bit since then, and today, psychologists have a greater understanding of the factors that relate to employee performance. A major breakthrough came with Campbell's model of job performance, which was developed in the 1990s by analyzing a military dataset that looked at job performance in several different entry-level Army jobs. Until that point, I/O psychologists had struggled with something called the criterion problem. That is, what objective criterion or indicator should be used that best captures an employee's job performance. Campbell's insight was that rather than being a unitary thing, job performance should instead be conceptualized as a multifaceted construct that encompasses several different aspects. Specifically, Campbell used the same statistical technique we talked about last week, factor analysis, to identify 8 factors that comprise job performance, which you can see here in the top row in this graphic. The first 3 factors, job-specific task behaviors, personal discipline, and demonstrating effort, are relevant for any job. Task-specific behaviors are the substantive tasks that make up the job description itself. Examples of task-specific behaviors might include things like a salesperson pitching a product or a software engineer debugging a piece of code. This is distinguished from non-task specific behaviors, which include other things an employee might be expected to do that are not specific or unique to that particular job description. This might include things like training new staff members, for example. The next 5 factors, facilitating team performance, non-job specific task behaviors, which we just talked about, communication, supervision leadership, and management administration, are only relevant for certain types of jobs. For example, you wouldn't expect a person to need leadership and managerial abilities unless they were in a management level position. Moreover, Campbell hypothesized that all 8 of these job performance indicators are determined by just 3 inputs: an employee's declarative knowledge, procedural knowledge, and motivation. Declarative knowledge refers to knowing facts and information relevant to a job. For example, a physician knowing the symptoms of appendicitis would be part of his declarative knowledge. Procedural knowledge, on the other hand, is knowing how to actually do a job. That same doctor's ability to actually diagnose a real patient and successfully perform an appendectomy would be part of his procedural knowledge. Stated differently, declarative knowledge is about knowing what to do, whereas procedural knowledge is knowing how to do it. The last input is the employee's level of motivation. It's not enough to simply know what to do or even how to do it. The employee actually has to be motivated to do so. Beyond simply doing one's job, employers also generally care that their workers are ethical and treat the company in a respectful manner. Specifically, organizational citizenship behaviors, or OCBs, are voluntary behaviors that go beyond an employee's job description to help coworkers in the organization. An example might be treating other employees kindly, speaking positively about the company, or volunteering to take on an extra shift when needed. By contrast, counterproductive workplace behaviors, or CWBs, are actions that go against the interests of the organization. This might include things like outright theft, absenteeism, or getting into conflicts with other coworkers. So we've talked about factors that relate to job performance. But how do employers actually select employees who will be successful for a job in the first place? Employee selection is the process of choosing the best candidate for a job role. To start, employers must first decide what are the demands of the role itself. Often, employers do this by determining a list of what are called KSAs, which stands for the knowledge, skills, and abilities that a person must possess in order to be successful in a particular position. These might include things like technical knowledge, organizational knowledge, communication skills, problem-solving skills, or leadership skills. The United States Department of Labor maintains a public database called ONET, which lists the KSAs, as well as other educational, personality, and interest requirements for hundreds of different occupations. For each position, you can also see data on average earnings and projected job growth in that industry. The link to the ONET website is included on this slide, and you can check it out yourself if you'd like. Whether you've got a specific job in mind, or you're still just exploring a wide range of potential careers, you might find it to be a helpful resource. Once the KSAs and other requirements for a position have been identified, the next step is to find candidates who can fit that role. To do so, the company must use some means to evaluate potential candidates. These might include things like formal interviews, tests or inventories that measure people's knowledge or personality, or job demonstrations. For example, when I was on the job market for instructor positions, I had to do a demonstration of my teaching by giving a mock lecture. When evaluating candidates, U.S. companies must follow federal laws and regulations, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, the Civil Rights Act, and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Specifically, in the hiring process, companies cannot discriminate against candidates for reasons such as age, ethnicity, religion, gender, or other protected categories. The ADA also requires companies to make reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities. This might include things like allowing more frequent breaks or providing readers for blind personnel. However, there are certain exceptions made for what are called bona fide occupational qualifications, or BFOQs. BFOQs are requirements of certain occupations for which denying an individual employment would otherwise violate the law. For example, airline companies place age restrictions on pilots because of safety concerns. This does not violate the Age Discrimination in Employment Act because age has been determined to be a BFOQ for airline pilots. Another example of a BFOQ might be a person's religion when hiring for a religiously affiliated institution. An ongoing area of research is what kinds of evaluations work best for predicting later job performance. For example, some researchers have recently begun to investigate whether AI algorithms can potentially do a better job of selecting the most qualified candidates. Once employees are hired, what helps them to be happy and successful in their role? Contrary to popular belief, most employers do actually care that their employees are happy and satisfied. For one, happy employees may be more motivated to perform well at work, which, according to Campbell's model, should lead to increased job performance. And indeed, job satisfaction and job performance do appear to be moderately correlated. Happy employees are also more likely to engage in organizational citizenship behaviors, which ultimately helps the organization. On the flip side, they may be less likely to engage in negative counterproductive workplace behaviors. Finally, happy employees are slightly less likely to leave the organization, and most companies are motivated to avoid employee turnover because it's expensive to hire and train new people. Several studies have investigated different antecedents or predictors of employees' job satisfaction. The specific antecedents will likely vary somewhat from job to job and from person to person. However, Allegre and colleagues have identified several domains relevant for job satisfaction more broadly, which you can see here on this slide. These include things like support from supervisors, personal identification with the company's mission and strategy, and work-family balance. In this video, I discussed 3 related topics in I/O psychology: job performance, employee selection, and employees' job satisfaction. For the exam, you should be able to define the Hawthorne effect, describe and explain the different elements of Campbell's model of job performance, define organizational citizenship behaviors and counterproductive workplace behaviors and identify each in an example, define BFOQs and explain how they can affect the hiring process, and discuss factors relevant for employees' job satisfaction.